Hi, everyone. Good to see you today. Thanks for joining me for this webinar. We're going to be covering a really interesting topic that I think is really very timely right now, which is how do we maximize marketing impact going into a new year, which looks to be a little bit of a challenging year ahead. So appreciate you joining me. We're going to be covering a good amount of issues today. Let me go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Esther Flammer. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Wrike. I have about 20 years of experience across B2B tech, agency, and nonprofit sectors. And I lead a team currently of more than 100 talented marketers and creatives across corporate marketing, brand and design, product marketing, digital and demand gen, global field marketing, sales development, and marketing operations. First, let me tell you a little bit about Wrike. We are here on a mission to help people do the best work of their lives. This is our mission statement, and this is something we are very, very passionate about. And we think day in and day out how we can do this in a more meaningful way. And what we are is we're the pioneers of work management. We created this category and our solution about 16 years ago because we knew that there was a better way for organizations to work. And so what we do is we bring teams and organizations into a single powerful work management platform. And it helps teams and organizations collaborate, create, and exceed goals every single day. We are used by over 2 million people, over 20,000 customers, across every single industry and every single function that you can think of. And we're very proud of our customer base, some of the best brands in the world, I would say. And here's just some of the logos that we work with every day. Let me go through our agenda really quickly. So what are we covering today? I'm going to talk first about some new macro trends that are shaking up the way that we work, that I think a lot of marketers are now facing and organizations around the world are facing. We're going to go through the state of marketing specifically, how those trends specifically are impacting marketers in every single industry. We are going to talk through priorities as we go into a new year of ways of thinking and ways to prioritize and be able to actually manage some of those macro trends that we're all facing. And then we're going to talk through delivering impactful work. And so really quickly, first, before we begin, I'm going to ask everyone a question that I want you to think about, which is, what do you find most fulfilling at work? And the reason why I ask is because I know many of us work to live, not live to work. But considering how much time we spend working, work in our minds should be enjoyable and fulfilling, which is probably why we've all chosen to actually be in marketing. Hopefully you love what you do. But in your professional life, you know, what makes you happy and what makes you feel fulfilled? And the question is important because meaningful work actually is the #1 kind of reason why people want to continue to work at a workplace, continue in their career path. You feel like you're contributing to a better world. You're producing work you can feel proud of. It means something to you. It gives you a sense of purpose. And actually, this is more powerful than, dare I say, money. And I think a lot of people are realizing this, especially, again, if you're considering some of the macroeconomic environment and some of the trends that are happening, where we are seeing 58% of workers leaving one job for another that potentially even paid less because they knew their work would have more meaning, where they felt that they could be more impactful in their work. Nobody wants to feel like they're putting a lot of time and effort into a job where you're spending, 40+ hours a week and you're not feeling valued, or you're not feeling like you're contributing well, or you're feeling like it's just really hard to get work done. You want to feel like even the smallest actions are contributing to a bigger picture and making an impact, and that you're seeing that instant connection to your work across your team and across your company. So let's face it, the more that you find meaning in your work, the happier you are. The happier you are, the more productive you are, and the more creative and impactful that you can be within marketing, especially. And so with that greater sense of purpose, you have that stronger drive to succeed. And so we believe that meaningful work is impactful work. And why is that important as we look at some of these macro trends that are happening today? And I think there's a lot of things that are top of mind for marketers and for organizations around the world in terms of basically trends that are taking and things that are happening across macroeconomic environments as well as in businesses where it's taking away from our ability to be able to deliver meaningful and impactful work. And so when we're looking at some of those economic pressures, right, the outlook isn't looking very good. When we're looking at growth projections over the last 3 years, 2021, we actually saw a huge uptick in terms of those growth projections, but then they've cut in half this year. And what we're looking at for next year is even a worse growth projection. Plus, as growth slows, we're seeing inflation rise. And then, prices have increased in 90% of categories across both B2B and B2C. And this impact is being felt, right? There's a lot of pressure because consumers and businesses are limiting their spending. We're seeing budget cutbacks. We're seeing some slowdowns. We're seeing cutbacks both from a resource standpoint and a budget standpoint. And this puts growth actually in the bottom 10% of outcomes since 1970. So we're seeing a lot of those components happen, which then also we see the result in terms of the decline in workplace productivity. And we've actually seen the largest productivity decline in terms of the output of work that is happening. We've actually seen a huge decline since essentially the Great Depression. And so we're seeing productivity decline, we're seeing output and how much people are getting out of their work decline. But at the same time, interestingly, we are seeing that people are putting in more hours, that the hours of work have increased year over year, quarter over quarter, which is really kind of a depressing statistic, right? We're working more, we're producing less. And so this is obviously leading to a lot of those other trends that we're seeing across, various organizations around burnout, resignations, quiet quitting, right? And just, I would say overall that meaningful work or that ability to feel like you are impacting your team, your company, and beyond, we're seeing that decrease. So why have we seen such a productivity decline? We're going to talk a little bit about just some of the stats that we've seen in terms of the spike of applications that people are using, the complexity that people are feeling when they are dealing with multiple applications, multiple tools, hybrid workforces, the inability to be able to track across multiple platforms and systems, that slowdown of productivity, and it's exacerbating those complexities that we are seeing across the way that we work. And so we've actually done a good amount of research here, not just within Wrike, but actually globally. And there's a term out there that basically people talk about the dark matter of the universe, which is we only actually know 5% of what is out there in the universe. 95% is unknown. It's invisible. We don't even know that it exists, right? And that's just in the universe, out in space. And what we believe is the same thing is actually happening with work, that there is a ton of work that flies under the radar and gets lost. And so I'm going to put some scenarios out there, right, in terms of familiar situations that I think we can all agree this happens literally every single day. So you just get off a fantastic brainstorm, you conduct it in Zoom across hybrid workforces, everyone is pumped up, we have a bunch of ideas, and then you literally leave the meeting, a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks pass, and nothing gets done, right? The action items are missed. Did anyone take notes? Did anyone actually follow through on those action items? And again, you see work that gets lost. Another example is someone slacks you about edits that needs to be made, and you're in a meeting and you miss it, or you take a lunch break and you forget about it, you didn't mark it as unread, you didn't set a reminder, and all of a sudden that gets lost, and they have to ping you a couple of days later, hey, just want to remind you about some edits that need to be made. So all of these are just examples of areas where work is not planned, it's not executed, it's not tracked, and it's not measured in one place. And so I'm going to ask a question now. We're going to do a quick poll. What proportion of your team's work do you think that you have visibility into? And as marketers, this is a really interesting idea, because if you think about all of the different functions across product marketing, digital, design, creative production, marketing operations, there's a lot of work that is taking place across multiple functions. There's sales requests that are coming in. There's product requests that are coming in. There's CS requests that are coming in. You're getting a lot of requests from all over. Hey, we have an edit on the website. Hey, what happened to those leads? There's constantly things that are coming in. There are things that are being worked on, but a lot of that visibility into that work is being lost. And what we see in marketing is that this is actually a trend where marketers, out of all of the other departments within an organization, actually have a lot less visibility, and we're losing a lot of that visibility into the work that our teams are doing, which then impact, obviously, our ability to produce revenue, our ability to produce campaigns, leads, pipeline, all of the things, brand campaigns, all of those components that we're working towards. We're losing that visibility into. We're unable to be able to report on what the effectiveness of our team is doing, how it's contributing to the bottom line, and we lose a lot there, right? And so let's go ahead and close the poll, and let's take a look actually to see. Let's see, can we show the results? There we go. Okay, so about 41 to 60% is the majority. And this is perfectly in line with the research that we've done as well. Let's go ahead and close that poll, and then go to the next slide. So this is actually what we saw, exactly within that 40 to 60%, it's actually half. Exactly half, in terms of what marketing professionals are seeing in terms of leadership does not have visibility into the work that's being done. Can't track progress, can't track the effectiveness, can't track the output. And we've also found, because that's a very significant amount, right? If you're thinking through half of all the work that's being done across your marketing organization is being lost, we actually see then that we've lost a quarter of a year on wasted work. Actually 100 days, right? And that includes things like delayed or canceled projects, lost time due to disruption, complexity, and it's also taking a personal toll. So we talked a little bit about burnout, but the fact is that employees are spending their own personal time. So they're using weekend time, they're working evenings, and that causes even more stress and burnout. And what does that cost look like? So it's a huge financial cost to organizations. And this is something that actually is really interesting as you think through the cost of some of that lack of visibility of work, as well as some of the issues in terms of how are you looking at measuring productivity. But if you're looking at that cost to organizations, we're looking at $70 million across, and that's on average. Some are more, some are less, but that's based on wasted time, project delays and cancellations, and employee churn. This is actually an interesting statistic because this is only for marketing. This is actually $17 million more than other departments. And largely because what we're looking at is marketing oftentimes is a revenue driver, right? What marketing is doing in terms of producing leads and pipeline and revenue, it does impact the bottom line. And so when we are ineffective and when we aren't appropriately creating efficiencies and automation and things like that in our workflows, and we're not able to produce, what does that mean in terms of measuring that impact? It actually is a significant cost to the business. So let's go into the state of marketing really quickly. And I don't think that anyone would be surprised in this statement, in that the struggle is real. I think marketers are struggling, and it's interesting. In every conversation I have with fellow marketers or fellow CMOs, it is a rising pressure. It continues to be more and more pressure, and we're not. I would say that this is not something that's net new, right? I think marketers have always been under a lot of pressure in terms of, hey, make sure you have your finger on the pulse of what's happening, make sure you're ahead of competitors, make sure you're driving leads in pipeline, make sure that you're being creative, get our brand out there, like literally all of the things that are being put on marketing. But at the same time, what we're seeing especially today, is that there is even more of a pressure to perform, right? And let's take a look. And I'd first of all, again, love to bring it to this audience on what do you feel like is your challenge at work today? Because again, it's very interesting as I'm talking to different marketers. As I mentioned, there's just increasing pressure where before it's always been pressure to perform and to produce ROI and to produce the right amount of campaigns and leads, etc. But at this point, we're seeing a huge pullback in the market where before maybe there was an environment of growth at all costs. And now it's very much about efficiency, but also continue to produce at the same level, at the same quality, at the same quantity, produce more with less. And so I'm interested to see what is it that our audience is seeing in terms of biggest challenges. Is it budget? Is it the fact that we don't have enough time in the day to do all of the requests that are coming in? Lack of resources, lack of recognition, inability to show ROI. It's probably all of the above. What would you say is maybe the biggest? Let's go ahead and close the poll. Looks like we have a good amount of answers, not enough time in the day. I think that is very true, and I think that resonates a huge amount with everyone because there are a lot of asks. And it is never ending. And as marketers know, our job is never ending. And I think the funny thing is, we always talk about everyone is a marketer. So everyone will see an ad campaign or do a Google search or look at our website from literally anywhere across the company and say, hey, I need you to fix this. Why aren't you doing this? What about this idea? Have you thought about this? How come you're not giving us more? And there's just not enough time in the day to do it all. And so we're going to talk a lot about prioritization, actually, because I think that's a huge thing. But if you look at it, there's obviously lack of resources, ROI, not enough budget. All of those struggles are, all of those challenges are top of mind for marketers today. So thanks for those answers. Let's go ahead and close and continue on with the next slide. So how are marketing teams taking the hits? So let's take a look at these 4 areas. And again, I don't think this is net new for anyone, but what we are seeing is, first of all, there is a renewed focus from leaders around the world at every single organization on increasing efficiency. Like I said, it's no longer a growth at all costs. It is now, you need to showcase every single dollar, right? Every single a dollar coming in for a dollar coming out type of thing. So huge renewed focus on efficiency, and we are seeing this across the board. Budget constraints, pullbacks, layoffs, right? RIFs, all of those components of, hey, you need to cut those contracts, you need to renegotiate that price, you need to cut spend, and I also need you to continue to actually produce just as much, if not more. So it's that do more with less in terms of the output, which I said, productivity, how do you maximize every single resource that you have with smaller teams, smaller budgets, and then how do you showcase that ROI and justify all of that spend of the spend that we have? How do we prioritize, and then how do we justify? Then we feel that in terms of that recognition, which is that the increasing pace of work that is leaving very little time for actually feeling like you can do meaningful work, feeling like you can do work that you're proud of, that's hugely creative and innovative and done really, really well, because you're trying to move too fast. We don't have enough time in the day, so you have to just crank out work that maybe could be better. And then that ultimately impacts our employees and our teams. So just newer sets of challenges around burnout, around losing people, around especially with the hybrid work, really even understanding what are your teams doing. And then also, right, we know that this impacts our teams we've just done cutback, so now it's even more on our teams. And we've lost a lot over the last few years in terms of some of that ability to get in person and to maximize some of those kind of team brainstormings and really feeling like we can work together, all of those components. And so it is compounded, right? And so when I say the struggle is real, I think we all feel it. And so let's take a look at some of our research that shows some of that as well. So marketing professionals are actually dealing with more systems and apps on a daily basis, and only half of those are integrated. And so we actually looked at a number of different departments, and you're seeing, typically marketing and creative agencies are the ones that actually have potentially the most number of systems, which also creates silos in that data that's being processed. And so you're running campaigns on multiple platforms, you're utilizing all sorts of different apps internally, and then it's creating disjointed processes, and again, misalignment, which I think is a huge thing as well. Then we're dealing with an overload of just disruption, and largely, what you see here is marketing and creative agencies are seeing a huge amount of disruption in their day-to-day, just Slack, Zoom, email, text message, literally everything in between. I know you're all getting flooded with all these requests across the organization and internally within marketing. And so there's just a lot to have to parse through. And so that actually does showcase that marketing teams are just under way more stress. So if you're thinking about how much you're being asked to produce, innovate while you're learning all these different tools and systems and getting pinged every different second from every single, different stakeholder across the company, you are seeing that 72%, and I would say that's probably even more, right, of marketing professionals are just feeling that overload. And then, again, you're seeing that there's not really a light at the end of the tunnel. Are we actually going to fix this? Is this something that's going to end, or is this just going to be a constant kind of acceleration of more and more and being asked to do more with less? And so if we take a look also at that lack of visibility, and we talked a little bit about that, right? Something has to give. That lack of clarity, that lack of alignment, and that lack of productivity is exacerbating this larger question, right, of how can we actually deliver impactful work, and how can we maximize marketing impact going into next year? How do we prepare our teams? How do we prioritize? So let's talk through some of those 5 priorities, because I want to tell you a little bit on what has to be top of mind for you as you go into this year, understanding it's kind of, I don't need more anxiety. Thank you, Esther. Appreciate all of those very depressing statistics. Don't worry, I'm here with solutions. I want to talk about what should be top of mind for you as you're planning out your year, and how to showcase that your work has value and showcase the value of your marketing organization within your business. So let's start by getting our priorities straight. The first one is around accelerating time to market. And I know we just talked about the pace of work, and now it's you have to go even faster, but it's actually really important about making sure that you're accelerating that time to market. So there is a study done by McKinsey & Company that found that if you are late to market by 6 months, your earnings will be 33% less over the next 5 years than if you were right on time in coming to the market. And so that is actually a huge significant impact to the business, which means you do need to be ahead of the curve, right? You have to reach buyers before competitors do. And that ultimately means you need to understand buying habits. You need to understand some of the shifts in that buying behavior, what they're looking for, be innovative about those channels, purchase intent. You got to be utilizing some of those tools out there and the data out there to be able to accelerate that time to market. And so that really makes it so that as you're planning for next year, thinking through what are the top priorities that get us to market as quickly as possible. How do you make sure that you're prioritizing your programs, your campaigns, your launches, all of those components to accelerate that time to market? And what I tell my team a lot is minimum viable product, right? It is a product management, product development term. As you think about minimum viable product of basically getting a beta client, getting a beta product out there, just getting it into market and seeing how it does, test, iterate, and optimize. In my mind, it's very much the same type of approach for marketing, where I've talked a lot with my team of like, I don't want to take 3 months to build something out that's hugely sophisticated, that has all of those components, just to get it into market and then realize, oh, that message actually didn't really work, right? It didn't actually resonate with that target audience. That target audience doesn't buy that way. That's not really their pain point, or it's not differentiated enough, right? So to me, it's a you have to move quickly. You have to really think through, how do we accelerate that time to market, and how do we put a minimum viable product out there, meaning a campaign, a message, right? Something that you're testing. Look to see what happens, right? Test, iterate, and optimize, and then continue to improve. But this is a big component and something that should be top of mind as you're planning out 2023. Second, obviously ROI. Everyone's favorite topic. You know this was going to come up. This is top of mind for everyone. And the economic instability right now has just absolutely elevated the importance of ROI. And so with that, you know, we've talked about budget cuts. We've talked about pressure for accountability, basically, for every single dollar spent. And so, you know, this means that having the appropriate infrastructure in place so that you can measure everything that you're doing, that you actually, before you even run a campaign, before you decide on some of those priorities, can we actually even measure this? And I talked a little bit about that minimum viable product of accelerating time to market. Put benchmarks in place of, okay, we're going to go to market with maybe a new revamped homepage. Let's just say we're going to revamp the homepage on our website. What was the benchmark before? What is our goal? How do we believe that we've created a business justification to do this, that we believe that we will see an increase on conversions, an increase on traffic? We're going to make it more, you know, focus on the buyer's journey, where we can generate more of those conversions to leads. And this is what we believe the impact to be. Put that out there, accelerate that time to market, put those benchmarks in place, and then test, you know, even incrementally, to show early indicators, and then showcase what that looked like in terms of the impact. And that should be everything that you're doing, and especially, you know, budget line item spend. So as you're thinking through, we're going to invest in this event, we're going to invest in this specific campaign, these digital channels, everything has to be tied to ROI. Then if you're looking at number 3, executing multi-channel integrated campaigns. So organizations that prioritize stronger brand presence actually increase revenue by 23%, according to Inc. This is something that's really, really interesting, because again, as you think through budget pullbacks, I feel like the first thing that gets cut are things that are not directly tied to ROI, according to number 2, right? And oftentimes those are things like brand, like top of funnel, like just getting your logo out there. And part of that is because it is not tied to revenue. It is not directly correlated to ROI. So things that are unproven mean that you will probably cut that, right? Or that there will be more scrutiny on why are you spending there. And so in accordance to driving ROI, you have to make sure that you are justifying every single dollar in every single channel, but at the same time, make sure you do not cut your multi-channel campaigns, because as we know, buying behavior continues to shift, but it is never I saw one ad, I clicked, I purchased. That typically doesn't happen. It does in some cases, but typically, especially for B2B and especially for certain buyers, it does require a lot more. And you might have heard of, we talk about dark matter of work. There's also dark funnel, right? And other things where there's just a lot of loss of an understanding of what is it, what are all the clicks, what are all the touches that it takes for a person, for a buyer to actually purchase a solution. And they need to have trust, and they need to have awareness, and they need to understand the differentiation between you and everyone else out there. And they need to probably understand, you know, or they need to have an understanding of why they need something, why this is the best solution. Parse through all of the things of word of mouth and referrals and asking around their networks and looking at reviews, sites, and all of those components before actually purchasing. And again, the more you can really understand, tied it to ROI, but having that infrastructure on being able to measure all of those components, and even if it's not a direct correlation where they clicked through this and then they purchased, but even having some level of understanding and being able to provide that business justification of a certain channel, because we see that the two of these channels together or multiple channels together actually does produce revenue, that pays off. And even just showcasing things like, hey, I know we're shifting down paid search and we're trying to bump up organic search, for example, and we're investing in organic because of the cost of acquisition. Being able to actually showcase, hey, just so you know, in the trends that we've seen, when paid search decreases, organic search decreases. We know there's a correlation. Here's the data that showcases that, and here's why we need to make sure that we're providing a balanced view on all of those channels. Number 4, we're going to talk a little bit about optimizing resources. And again, we just said, I think for the majority of us, there's just not enough time in the day to do everything. And we're seeing a pullback on the resources that we have. And so as we are, taking a look at our resources and potentially doing resource cuts or whatnot, right? Resource planning is absolutely huge. It is something where not only are you prioritizing, here are the channels, here's where I need to spend, here's how I accelerate time to market, but you also have to be doing a level of resource planning as part of that, which is how do we make sure that, if I need to accelerate time to market and I need to produce ROI and we're going to prioritize these specific campaigns because it is going to give us the leads and the revenue that we need, do we have the appropriate resources to be able to do that effectively, right? So that you can estimate those resource needs, you can understand how much are you doing in-house, how much do you need to budget to potentially resource appropriately from an outsourcing standpoint, how are you optimizing those workloads? That's a huge component because oftentimes you do have a number of different campaign managers, a number of different departments across your marketing department, a number of different teams that all have the same prioritization or different prioritizations, honestly. And it's going maybe to a centralized team, or there's overlap or misalignment in terms of, hey, I have 5 campaigns that we need to get out the door this week or this month. There's no way we can do that. So making sure that you have a really true understanding of resource planning and budget optimization to make sure that you aren't missing those deadlines and that you aren't potentially putting yourself in a bad position later on. And then the 5th is really around that employee satisfaction, that employee engagement. And we all know this, as we had mentioned, through some of those larger challenges that we're seeing in terms of burnout, in terms of all of those components. According to our own research, happier employees commit 26% fewer clerical errors. They demonstrate 79% lower burnout, and they have a 61% lower likelihood of churning. And we know our employees, our teams, are absolutely critical to our ability to be able to impact and maximize impact for the next year. So making sure that you're removing barriers to productivity and friction, that you're ensuring that you have alignment on those priorities, that you have alignment on, what is it that we're going to do in the future, and then how do we make sure that is in line with sales, and that is in line with product, and that is aligned across your marketing organization, but also across your larger organization, so that your employees can feel like they are doing meaningful work and focus on value added work. So I'm going to now take you through a little bit of a framework of delivering that impactful work for next year. And so what are some things that we can do? And here's kind of our recipe that we say, in order to deliver that impactful work, it calls for 6 ingredients. So we'll go through each of these in a little bit more detail. On the surface, they may seem a little bit obvious, but they've actually been proven to be quite difficult to master for various teams. And so the first is around goals, visibility, workflows, integrations, automation, and collaboration. So let's dive into that, because if you focus on each of these main components, if you nail them, you will actually see significant improvement in your ability to produce quality work and campaigns and actually be able to showcase the results of that. So first, let's talk about goals. Everything should begin with that end goal. As I mentioned, tying it to those priorities and being able to understand what is it that we're trying to accomplish here. It actually helps when you do this organizationally, right? As marketers, we oftentimes go through all of our planning, go through our goal setting, figure out what does that look like in terms of how many leads that we need to create, or how much pipeline, or how many purchases, or whatnot. Is that actually tied to the overall company's objectives? And if you haven't heard of OKRs, it's actually, it's been made famous by Intel and Google. Google actually credits OKRs to its incredible success, and there's a lot of research and things out there about this, but this is basically like objectives and key results. And what it does is it stems from top down, and then it actually goes in across every single department. And what's important here, right, is the fact that marketing, we're not setting our own goals. We're actually tied to the organization's success, but it makes it so that we are fully aligned with all of our key stakeholders. And so if you're thinking about product that is trying, has their own sets of goals and they need to do a number of launches, or they're trying to do some different product innovation or release certain features, and they come to marketing of, hey, we need a product launch, or we need something that we need to set to market, and it's not aligned to marketing goals, that's going to be a big fire of the day, right? It's going to be a, oh no, we need to reprioritize and we need to realign. And that's just one example. And so making sure that each of the marketing's goals, that you're actually, one, setting it from top down at the organizational level, understanding what each departmental's goals are and making sure there's alignment, and then ensuring that there is very specific focus on, for marketing, if our goal is to increase brand recognition and awareness, our objective is measurable. We believe that we can increase social media engagement by 35%. And then it actually trickles down to the individual level, which is, okay, maybe that social media manager's objective is to increase the number of social media connections by 25%. So everything correlates and ties up and then actually is aligned across an organization. So it focuses first on that bigger picture. From an organizational standpoint, it makes sure that everyone is aligned, and then it actually takes it down to the individual level so that there's very clear understanding of what is it that I'm trying to accomplish, how do I get there. It's really good for professional development as you're thinking through that employee engagement standpoint, and it gives you an understanding of, are we all tracking towards the same thing? At the end of the quarter, at the end of the year, are we going to look back and say, were we successful? So that's a big component around making sure your goals are set. The second is around increasing visibility. And as we know, marketing, it's one of the reasons why we've all decided to work in marketing, I think, is because you get to work with multiple teams and multiple departments across an organization. You're working with sales, you're working with product. Again, you're working across a whole organization. And how do you make sure that you have that visibility of all of those asks that are coming from all your stakeholders, and then making sure that you can understand what is it that we're being asked to do? Is it something that we should be doing? How do we prioritize? And then how do we resource appropriately? And so this is where we talk a lot about a single source of truth, which is kind of having a one place to have that visibility into all of the requests that are coming in. It's a sale, a salesperson needs a deck, or it's a website request, or it's a campaign request, something like that. How do you make sure that you have full visibility into all the requests that are coming in, and then again, you're resourcing appropriately, or saying no? Because that's a big thing for marketers is, and again, back to that, there's not enough work in the day. You have to be able to say no to certain things that don't align to those OKRs, as I just mentioned, that don't align to the goals that are set, that don't align to the priorities, or honestly, if you're looking at cost benefit, it's going to take too much of a level of effort and resources, and it's not going to give us what we need, right? Which takes us back to the business case of, why are we doing the things that we're doing? So being able to actually have that intake of what are the things that are being asked, being able to prioritize across a marketing organization where it's not team specific, but it is across a large organization, and being able to appropriately resource or make decisions based off of what's coming in. And if you look at, just some of those workflows across marketing, one, there is that component of all of the requests that are coming in, whether that's from within marketing or outside of marketing, but making sure you have visibility into that, then ensuring that you're planning appropriately, you're prioritizing, you're making the decisions on what you will and will not do, and in what time frame, the resources that are required for that, the alignment that needs to happen in order to actually produce that campaign or project or program. All of the reviews, the reporting that then gets us to, did we actually do what we needed to do, what we said we were going to do when we set out to do this, and then that constant iteration. And then if you think through from a larger company standpoint, right, this is not just across marketing, this is actually helpful to have across a full organization, because we know marketing works so closely with all of the other departments within an organization. So let's take another poll, because I'm interested in kind of seeing this, right, in terms of where does your work happen? Does this happen across one place or several applications? Oftentimes we are seeing marketing teams that are honestly juggling lots of different systems. There's marketing automation, there's a CRM, there's all of your different digital and demand and campaign types of channels and applications that you need to utilize. Then there's all of the internal work components that happen. And so there's just a lot that's happening across multiple organizations and multiple applications. Is there a way then for us to get visibility into what is it actually being produced and how do we make it as effective as possible? And so let's go ahead and close that poll, take a look at the results. It looks like the majority of our attendees are saying that it's actually between 2 and 5 applications, but no one says there's one place, because there's lots and lots of different applications that are being utilized, 2 to 5, potentially up to 6 to 10, and then even some that have more than 10, which is a lot. So let's go ahead and close that poll. And then I'm going to talk really quickly about a quick customer story, just because we love to learn from our peers and from various customers and marketers out there. But the Texas Rangers, again, a great organization. They have about 15 departments and 300 employees, and they wanted to basically do a rebrand of their entire ballpark space. And so they built out a hugely immersive, experiential stadium and branding campaign as a result of that really was getting everyone excited when they came in person to be able to really experience the history and the future of the Texas Rangers. And what happened was the pandemic happened. And so they put all of this budget and all of this thought and creativity into being able to build out this amazing campaign and experiential experience within the stadium itself. And then they had to pivot. And then they created actually a Stay Strong campaign during the pandemic, because they knew they couldn't get in person. They knew they couldn't get in front of their fan base through the pandemic, because no one was coming into games. And so they actually took it all online and created an amazing virtual experience where they created kind of a centralized hub for all of their fans to come in and find content, to find views of the players, to learn about them, to get even like favorite recipes from the players and coloring pages, and again found a way to be able to connect to their fan base even without the in-person game experience. And they utilized Wrike and were able to essentially be able to pivot very, very quickly in the pandemic and in a hybrid environment to be able to manage that and be able to actually produce an amazing campaign and content area or hub very, very quickly, because they had visibility and they had that source of truth within their organization. The third pillar is actually around the workflows. And again, if you think through automation of repeatable workflows or repeatable steps or manual tasks, this is something that every organization is looking to do, especially with this more focus on streamlining productivity and making sure that you're getting more efficiency within your organization. So when you think about your creative production, when you're thinking about a campaign that's being produced, when you're thinking about a product launch that's happening, or a go-to-market strategy, there are a lot of workflows that are the same every single time. And so really thinking through mapping out all of those workflows and actually figuring out what are those workflows that we could potentially repeat and be able to automate, so that we don't have to do this manually every single time, so that we don't have to get 6 people in a room, 12 people in a room, 20 people in a room to basically identify what is it, what are all the steps, does everyone have the bandwidth to be able to do this? Do we have, is everyone on the right, deadline? Do we have the resources? How do we get aligned? Making sure that you are automating all of that workflow, all of those repeatable workflows, especially. Our design team is actually a great example of some of the workflows that we've created within the design team, because there's lots of assets that we're creating that are very, very similar. Same types of banner sizes for ad campaigns. How do you actually repeat that and create templates, create some of those, identifying some of those areas where there are bottlenecks and trying to make sure that we're automating those as quickly as possible. It's a great way to get efficiency. And really quickly on another kind of story on this, Estee Lauder, amazing brand, obviously premier beauty line. So they actually began a journey years ago, 5 years ago, with their marketing and creative transformation. They had no digital asset management in place. They had no digital workspace. They were literally carrying around physical files of their creatives and thumb drives. And so they actually standardized their global processes across 30 different creative teams in multiple regions and time zones, and actually utilized, again, a centralized work solution and automated a lot of those workflows from a creative standpoint in order to actually be able to create faster, more quality ad campaigns and creative campaigns across the board. The next one is around integration. So again, we just talked about all of the different platforms, some over 10, but more than 2 for sure, right? And again, that average is about 15 applications that your teams are working on, from Adobe Creative Cloud to Slack to Miro. It's, again, very disruptive to utilize all of those, or to have disconnected not just work, but also the data, right? And so that's something that as marketers, we're constantly thinking through, is how to better integrate all of our tools, not just from an internal workflow standpoint, and make sure that we're getting alignment and increasing those efficiencies in terms of production or workflows, but also in terms of the data that you need in order to produce those metrics for ROI. And so if you have multiple campaigns in multiple different places, you're not understanding what that looks like in terms of bottlenecks or in terms of missed deadlines, and all of those version control components. If those are all in disparate places, it makes it very, very difficult to be able to effectively produce those campaigns and then showcase that ROI. So integration is key. Automation, we talked a little bit about that, but also as you're thinking through not just the workflow component, but the automation of pieces, and that's what I mentioned in terms of templates, that's a huge component. And I know I've worked with creative teams where they've created templates from an ad standpoint, again, as I mentioned, in terms of similar size banner ads or things like that, that you can very quickly test, making sure that you have templates so that you can, one, onboard people very, very quickly, to make sure there's standardization across work that's being done across multiple teams, and then making sure that you can expedite that acceleration to market and expedite that output is very important. And then finally, bringing that team together. We talked a lot about the power of brainstorming and power of the team coming together and really making sure there's full alignment, but also that innovation and the creativity that happens when you do bring your teams together and make sure that you're able to have the right conversations, align appropriately, prioritize in the same way, but also just to think outside of the box when it comes to trying to get in front of buyers. We're going to talk a little bit about how do you actually measure that impact. And so teams right now, we already know you got to reach the right audience with the right time and the right message, and you have to stay on budget. And so breaking down those silos when it comes to making sure that everyone is on the same page in terms of what is being measured. So again, we talked about working to top line goals, making sure that you are setting those goals before you even start, of how many leads, what does that revenue look like in terms of that campaign that you're looking to generate? What's the reach? What are the number of eyeballs or impressions that you want to make? But tying it back to ROI. The second is, as I mentioned, around those micro improvements. So even if it's something that is a little bit more difficult to measure, things like brand awareness, right? There are certain aspects that you can take a look at to see, are we improving? Are we doing what we needed to do in terms of customer engagement, website traffic, etc.? What is it that we're trying to test? How do we test? And then how do we iterate and optimize and continue to move forward and showcase the results and the value of what we're doing? And then how do we measure some of that success internally as well, in terms of, some of the productivity gains, the alignment gains, adoption that's happening across the organization, etc. And our final story of the day is on Sony Pictures. So again, an amazing brand. Their challenge was they worked very differently. Everyone had a little bit of a different work style or a different workflow when it came to different teams. And they needed that workspace that included that flexibility, the visibility, and especially the reporting aspect, which is what's actually happening in terms of all of the workflows that are happening in terms of our resources, but also can we tie that back to ROI, and can we tie that back to campaign management. And so that was a huge component where saw a huge level of efficiency, productivity, and output that happened after they incorporated Wrike. So by understanding those top priorities, I'm going to leave some time for questions and wrap this up. But ideally, follow that recipe for success to see maximum efficiency, maximum productivity, more dollars saved, a happier workforce, and more meaningful impact as you go into 2023. So that's it for me. Let me go ahead and hand it over to Brandon, and we can open it up for questions. Brandon, did you have any questions that came in?
Yeah, before we get to that, thanks. Really great stuff. That concludes the presentation portion of the webinar. While I get to the last poll here, if you don't mind, please take a look at a few questions that came in while I do our last poll here. What option best describes your attendance today? I'm evaluating Wrike and would like to talk to a sales rep. I'm most interested in the webinar content, or you're a Wrike customer joining us today. Give it a few more seconds while we collect some responses, and then we'll jump to the Q&A portion. All right, I'm going to close the poll. Anything jump out to you in the questions there, Esther?
No, it looks like one of the questions we got are how are marketing teams sharing what they are working on with the rest of their companies not on Wrike? That's a great question because oftentimes what we see, and I was a Wrike customer actually at my last company with our whole marketing organization that was on Wrike, but the rest of the organization was not. And so there are a few things that I think can be helpful. So one is we actually did open up various request forms as well as various views to other, especially key stakeholders outside of Wrike. So sales, for example, if they wanted to request a certain field event, they wanted to request a certain piece of collateral, a sales tool, a campaign, we actually had a lot of those intake request forms that came in, and then we could actually provide visibility through various kind of user licenses so that they had enough to be able to not get overwhelmed and not see everything that was happening, all of the nuts and bolts of the marketing processes within Wrike, but actually be able to just look at, what is it they're requesting, how are they tracking where their request is, and then be able to have input into what's happening with that request. There are a number of other ways outside of Wrike where you can also make sure that you are aligning appropriately and ensuring that you're sharing all of the goodness that marketing is doing. I would say make sure you're talking with your sales teams especially, but also other partners of a cadence that makes the most sense, whether it's a calendar view, and there are things where you can look at, we've created calendar views within Wrike because all of our work was done there, and then being able to actually showcase here's a higher level view and a different view that we actually do for client facing types of departments, and we can showcase that and they can see things in real time. There are also areas where we created presentations, we've used other tools like Guru or whatever was utilized for sales in terms of sales enablement. And we like to use a lot of the apps that they are used to using, sometimes just because that is helpful, so that they don't have to learn a net new tool. We oftentimes do monthly or quarterly joining of kind of a marketing review or an all hands. So if there's a sales all hands or a product all hands, making sure that we're showcasing, here are some of the things that we're reviewing from the last quarter of what was successful. Here's a view looking forward of the things that we're planning for this year, for this quarter. And then there's obviously also just weekly cadences that oftentimes happen with internal teams to make sure that there's full alignment. Excuse me. What other questions do you see, Brandon?
Let me jump to this next one here. Is there a way to enter estimated ROI for items in the backlog in order to best prioritize campaigns going into a sprint?
Yeah. So I would actually do that. So oftentimes, and what I've had my teams do is to justify a lot of the campaigns that they want to run. And sometimes it's a campaign we've done in the past, or it's a similar type of campaign. So what I ask for the team to do is look at historical data. So maybe it's an event that we're sponsoring, or maybe it's a campaign that we've run in the past that is fairly similar. So it's what are the benchmark metrics based off of what we've seen historically, other best practices in terms of, and there's a lot of data out there in terms of performance of marketing campaigns based off of channel, and just put a benchmark in place of here's what we expect to see. And then what I would do is also do kind of a best in class type of thing of basically here's kind of a baseline metric and a best in class metric. And maybe we're going to come in somewhere between, ideally, right? And so I would put in some of those metrics in terms of business justification and being able to project. We're going to spend this amount of money. We're going to get this many leads, and this is what the output will be. The success metrics that we're showcasing, or impressions, or eyeballs, or customer engagement, right? All of what are the very specific KPIs that you should be looking at for each of those channels. Put a benchmark in place, as well as like a stretch goal type of thing, and then be able to showcase, or predict, here's the ROI that we expect to see. It's not always going to be exact, and it's not always going to be over from an ROI standpoint, but it gives you, sorry, something in my throat. But it gives you the ability to be able to, one, justify here's what we're doing, and it's a great exercise for your teams to do, to understand, right, why and where are we spending, and then be able to present that out and up. And then at the output, or after the fact, it gives you also something to measure yourself up against of, were we successful or were we not? And then also it gives you that ability to basically say, how do we get there? Our goal is 5%, we were at 3%. We're going to make some iterations and improvements. We're going to adjust content. We're going to adjust creative. We're going to try some other things out and see if we can bump that up more.
Great stuff. We're coming up on the hour here. We got 2 minutes left. Let's jump into one last question here. What tools does Wrike provide project managers that need to manage large number of projects simultaneously?
What tools specifically within Wrike?
Yes. What tools does Wrike provide project managers that need to manage a large number of projects simultaneously?
I mean, that is literally what Wrike is for, right? It is a very powerful platform that gives you the ability to manage multiple projects at scale across not just your own individual projects, but across the team, across departments, across an entire organization. We at Wrike utilize Wrike across literally every single department, and we have the ability to show, and this is where we have a ton of cross-functional collaboration, because I'm involved in tasks and projects that were started by product management, for example, of a various product launch, or with sales when we're talking about collaborating on a specific pitch deck or something like that. So we actually have the ability for us to be able to manage in various workflows across an organization, whether you're IT and you have very different workflow than marketing. And we're able to cross tag across those projects. As I mentioned, like even from an OKR view, product is going to have very different, or IT or HR is going to have very different goals than marketing, but sometimes they do absolutely align, and we need to align. And it's actually better when marketing is part of a lot of those conversations versus, various departments doing them in silos. And so it actually gives you the ability to manage multiple projects, not only for your department or team, but actually across an entire organization. So happy to chat more offline about that specifically, or ways that we can set that up for you. But it's a great question.
Excellent. Thank you for all that. And as a reminder, if we did not get to your question today, we will follow up with you directly after the webinar. But that concludes the webinar for today. Thank you everyone for attending. Maximize your marketing impact in 2023, and we hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you again, everybody.
Bye. Thanks all.